Aethermancer is a deeply immersive turn-based creature-collecting roguelike that blends strategic battles with, I would love to say, unpredictable roguelike elements, but with how it's designed, many of the elements fall into a linear routine quite quickly. While the challenge can be exciting as you lose yourself to the skill sets of each creatures and roles that they offer, those same elements do very well to undercut the joy of carefully planning your way through each biome and encounter on the path to defying the fractured ruins. As one of the last Aethermancers, a being with incredible talent able to bond with and tame wild creatures caught in a cycle of life, death, and rebirth, you wield this power to draw them back from the dark depths to continue the fight. Having played through the earlier demo, which only offered a glimpse at the first few biomes, now with its early access release, the game shows a few cracks beneath its polished exterior, but once you settle into its systems, it delivers many moments that leave you with this lingering sensation of wanting something more. A reoccurring complaint that I and also others have to some extent is that the game immediately feels too difficult. The thing is, you need to invest a few hours before you even have a fighting chance to understand what's good and what isn't. Each and every composition does have a chance to defeat the final bosses, but not every creature is as good as others. It just feels like you need a tank, a healer, and DPS to give yourself a fighting chance, when enemies and elites are out here dealing triple rotation one-shots. That is before stronger units, better synergies, and essential tools like healing and cleansing become available after multiple runs. I do both agree and disagree with this. It's a roguelite first and a roguelike second, but not in a way that feels rewarding. Each run follows the same structure as this is a meta progression system. Push through the fractured ruins, beat the bosses, capture more creatures, and repeat this until you get a good run that works well together. With every run, your roster will expand slowly, and with this expansion comes the artificial RNG element of will you see this creature that you want, or will it be something entirely different? As you hit certain milestones, you unlock bonuses like extra gold, more blank mementos for capturing creatures, additional soulbound favorites, and so on. On paper, that progression loop sounds rewarding, but in practice, it takes way too long and drowns out the experience. This whole system pushes you to want to capture as many creatures as possible, not because they are interesting, but because you have to, which ends up diluting your chances of getting the team you actually want. It's not like with Pokemon, where you can build a party from what you've caught. Instead, captured creatures are set aside and every new zone throws randomized options at you if you need to tag out your tank, healer, or DPS. Or maybe you'll get another 3 tanks of completely different elements that do not synergize with your current team, making it a lot harder to use abilities. Each creature's element is fixed, so why run a balanced mix of water, earth, fire, wind, and wild when you could stack elements together like earth, wind, water, wind, fire, wind? By rotating wind as your primary source of skills, it becomes the most accumulated element in storage. Though you'd be missing out on the earth element, this makes your skills consistently stronger and more reliable as you have a constant economy. I don't normally like switching out teams or builds often, and the game's worthiness mechanics, which reward you with additional stats for that creature and Aether currency for using the same creatures repeatedly, make me hesitant to change them. Despite this, I experimented with different setups, and over time it started to grow on me. Trying out new combinations feels rewarding when it works, adding another layer of strategy to the game even if it does feel forced on you. Whether or not you get the element or unit that completes your synergy comes down to luck, and if you miss it, you might not see that piece again until your next run. I'd have to say that the biggest issue with Aethermancer is the UI, specifically with the way that the chat overlays with the interaction scenes. For example, when I wanted to skip dialogue, the game immediately jumped into the shop screen. Because there is no pause or safeguard, I constantly ended up always buying items that I never meant to purchase. There's a very easy way to counteract this, and that's to prevent it with a confirmation warning or a slower transition. The combat's UI is also another weak spot. It's often unclear what elements are doing in your team or what the enemy is preparing. The game desperately needs a basic tooltip. For those who are playing with a controller, what is terror, burn, poison? You only learn through trial and error. Terror increases incoming damage on a target. Poison triggers damage at the start of your turn, and burn activates when that specific creature takes an action. But none of these things are explained in-game, the same thing with other effects. Whereas there's no way to reference those effects during combat with the use of a controller, because the inspection menu doesn't show current status effects or what the incoming abilities are going to do to you, unless you're playing the game with a keyboard and mouse. For a game that's built on strategy, this clear lack of status information makes fights feel more confusing than they should for anybody new to the game. Once you know, it's not all that bad. Another thing I've noticed is that many players call corruption one of the biggest issues with the game, and this is where its linear design shows. While I do agree from a new player's perspective, it's not that big of a deal, really. Simply put, without shields, your creatures will take direct damage. Direct damage builds corruption, and corruption lowers their default HP to a fixed value. Normal mode is capped at 75%, and higher tiers is raised to 99% of the creature's HP. The more corruption that stacks up, the less health your creatures start with in each battle. This can be cleansed with artifacts acquired through the Envoy and healed by a certain amount with combat abilities, or by 15 with the soup offered between each act after defeating each boss, which can be raised slightly when the town's upgrades are complete. It's not impossible to manage, but it does demand the right team composition, shields mostly, but you can also certainly heal through it with brute force and buffs. But if by chance the AI of the enemies focuses solely on one creature, they can easily become the weakest link and thus need to be cast aside in the next zone for a replacement to tag in if you haven't been able to build a good team. This may be annoying for some, it's just the easiest workaround if it does come to that. You might find that creature later on again, but because elements of skill and perks are randomized, you might not have the same build. Elemental stacking becomes essential. For example, we ran a team of Catcircer, Jotun, and Gargoyle, who all share a wind element, while also finding perks that give even more passive and active elements each turn. You might be wondering, how did I find this character? Well, it's meta progression. You need to capture a specific amount of creatures, fail, return to town, purchase the upgrades, and then find them in the next run. Another small annoyance because a lot of the good teams are hidden behind this time sink, when each run takes up to 2 hours to finish or fail. In this case, Catcircer, who is a fighter and a support, multi-strike stacked bleed on the enemies while stacking buffs on himself tremendously, followed by Gargoyle, who is a sidekick support fighter, as he constantly applied to himself sidekick triggered whenever he shielded himself or others, which allowed him and Catcircer to both attack together when Jotun attacked enemies, creating even more shields and creating constant value for the entire team. And because of their bonus passives, the buffs, and their element generation of wind and earth, it all continued to stack up due to the itemization and this well-rounded synergy of everybody maxing out their shields and face-tanking everything while creating a massive amount of elemental types to continue dishing out constant high-value skills to prevent one-shots and to deal damage consistently. Together with this synergy of a team, it kept the corruption from ever becoming a threat. Prior to this, corruption was a huge issue because we didn't have the right tanks, healers, or fighters, and it all came down to not wanting to play a certain predefined way. Beyond its gorgeous pixel art, which invokes a lot of similarities and looks and feel of Monster Sanctuary, Aethermancer is able to shine brightly once you've pushed past its design hurdles. Hands down, it's a well-developed and fantastic game despite some flaws. I have not been this engrossed in a turn-based experience for a long time. It's not about slapping together a ragtag team built on one-shot potential. It's about carefully crafting synergies that can spiral in insane ways. Every creature has strengths and weaknesses to consider, and each decision branches into more possibilities. One action can chain into 3, which can then ripple into 9 different effects. That layering makes every turn feel meaningful, with each choice adding weight to the overall strategy, once bosses and elites start throwing in debuffs and other effects. On that note, the soundtrack is phenomenal when it hits, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Particularly at the end of each run. It's because the music just fades out and it all fades to black, leaving you with a sense of emptiness. Perhaps as a byproduct of it being early access, and hopefully more content will be added over time to fill this void. The tense strategic gameplay paired with this immersive OST does a fantastic job of drawing you into the world. There were moments where I was completely absorbed, forgetting everything around me, only snapping back to reality after the sudden shift in atmosphere. It does a really good job of making each run feel inviting more than a chore. Your first run begins with a starter choice, much like picking a Pokemon. Out of all of the options, Jotun stands out as the best pick. I say this as somebody who did not consult any tier lists. I just thought that it looked cool, but later understood that its massive shields and taunt make the game noticeably easier and stronger when your synergies revolve around it. There are other viable paths, from power stacking builds that deal 50 to 100 damage per hit to heavy sustain builds with overwhelming healing in each scaling tier. but in the end, it comes down to your personal preference. Every run feels different even if you do end up with the same creatures and elemental formation. Skills can vary, and you might even unlock a powerful Maverick skill or passive that changes how you approach your strategy. Over time, capturing more creatures unlocks additional effects. Eventually, you'll even find shifted variants. Think Pokemon Shinies, but with a legal twist that doesn't have Nintendo breathing down the developers' necks. These shifted variants have a 5 or 15% spawn chance and come with many elements, passives, and traits, which adds variety and keeps each rerun interesting because of the offered diversity. I found that the problem lies in the capture system itself, because each run starts with just one blank memento, or 2 if you've unlocked that feature. And you may occasionally find more during the run, but those are epic drop rarity, and thus are very rare. On average, you capture only 2 to 3 per run. To reach some of the higher unlocks, you need 25 unique captures, which feels painfully slow given the limited pool of monsters. Including shifted variants, the total rises to 33, starting from a base of 17. And because shifted variants will not spawn unless you have already captured their normal variants, that takes a lot more time investment. Consider the bosses. All 4 of them are obtainable, with each of them giving you a 15% chance to spawn per run. That roughly translates to a 48% chance that any boss will be shifted, meaning that it could take around 2 hours for a typical player to snag one. And of course, the normal variants, each with about 14 opportunities at a 5% chance, only yield a few captures per run. Overall, unlocking more effects becomes a significant time sink, and if they didn't show as a shiny, or if you didn't have the required elemental break or memento, you've just blown your chance to yield a new capture each run. When a creature dies in combat, which will happen often as you navigate the game's systems, it can be reborn at the next rebirth shrine. However, this process is tied to a limited pool of monster souls, which are also required to activate events around the world. So if you do run out, you can no longer summon creatures, forcing you to fight at a disadvantage. In this case, we lost Gargoyle as soon as we spawned it, but we had enough souls to replace them. But all that was available was a creature that did not synergize well with my preferences, so in this case, I just decided to give up, and even though I had access to other mementos, I didn't get any of them as a choice. Successfully respawning a creature makes it slightly stronger than before, but its skills may also change, adding an extra layer of unpredictability to your strategy. Overall, despite a rocky start and the learning curve that could be more fully explained, Mirai Studios has once again done it with Aethermancer. The game offers a strong foundation for countless hours of heavily strategic gameplay. It offers many challenging modifiers to push the difficulty even further, which helps to test the limits of your builds and abilities. It's only when you sit down and truly try to push your strategies to their fullest that the game's full beauty shines through. If you've been on the fence, this is undoubtedly a gem that is worth experiencing firsthand, especially if you enjoy creature collection, turn-based strategy, and high replay value. Grinding for elements, uncovering secrets, and challenging the difficulty spikes. Fans of Monster Sanctuary will find a lot of love here. In the meantime, I eagerly await future updates to see how this title evolves. Aethermancer is certainly in good hands, and I have a lot of faith in its continued growth.